Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being such a vibrant crowd today. And thank you for coming to HCTP's 2024 Digital Inclusion Summit. My name is Ruben Avarenga, and I'm graduating this fall as a double major in business law and real estate. I am a digital equity intern here at HCTP, and I would like to welcome you here to this day of thoughtful conversations. My experiences at HCTP have brought an eye-opening view on AI, technology, and telecommunications within our Latino communities. My interest in these topics grew daily as I worked closely trying to advance digital equity through different drivers, such as with programs like the ACP or joining roundtable discussions with other civil society leaders. My work here inspired me to begin writing a white paper about AI literacy, specifically on the importance between the future of AI and education for Latino communities. I would like to thank Judan for giving me the opportunity, for the leadership opportunity to speak in front of you guys today. Now, to help me highlight the efforts of one of our amazing partners and board members, said, please join me in welcoming on stage Lizeth Avina Orozco.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lizeth Avina Orozco, a recent graduate from California State University, Northridge, with a major in business law. I am currently interning with SARE National as a policy analyst. My experience with SARE has allowed me to gain knowledge and express my passion for the organization's mission to offer opportunity in education and employment to low-income families and individuals. I'm currently involved with getting internet access across the country with SARE National, who partnered with the FCC on the ACP. The organization offers a variety of programs such as Ser Mujer, an economic development program focusing on women entrepreneurship, the Senior Community Service Employment Program, focusing on the training and employment needs of mature needs of individuals. The Cisco Networking Academy gives individuals the opportunity to continue their education in IT and cybersecurity, and gives them the opportunity to gain 3 different certifications that will allow them to continue their career in a growing environment. Lastly, the STEM program gives high schools the opportunity to give low-income students hands-on experience and mentorship to create a path for future leaders and express early exposure to STEM fields. Interning with SARE National has opened my eyes to world issues and how I want to continue my career in finding ways to support low-income families like my own. My colleague Ruben will continue with further comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lizeth. Now, please join me in welcoming on stage for our next panel called Internet for All. How do we connect reality to expectations? A conversation with NTIA. Please welcome Director of Public Engagement at NTIA, Francella Ochillo.
Thank you so much.
Federal Program Officer at NTIA, Gilbert Resendez. Director for the Maryland Office of Statewide Broadband, Ronnie Hammond. And last but not least, our moderator, Policy and Legislation Program Manager at LULAC and the Executive Director at Protect Us Kids, Edwin Canizales.
Hello. Hopefully I remember my lines. The fact to follow with the smart people here. I feel like Ringo Starr, they let John, George, and then Ringo. Anyway, accessibility, affordability, and adoption. That's the triangular sort of baseline we're using to build the economic engine that we call broadband, right? And it's the sort of set way to getting us to digital equity, but via digital education and literacy, and also developing the workforce for tomorrow. I often tell people, the triangle is like getting people registered to vote. It feels good, the little reward to your brain, the little sugar to your brain, but we got to do the turnout. And I think the workforce development and digital literacy is the getting people to vote, so to speak, right? And but without the base, we cannot start. So this is really, really important. I'm excited to have all of you here. I think the COVID-19 pandemic, for those who have to suffer through it, it sort of opened our eyes even more about the importance of the work that you're doing and the importance of the project, both BEAD and ACP, as well as all the other efforts we're going to be discussing here and have discussed already. I don't need to over-explain everything about the need for these initiatives. So pretty much I'm going to be the bus driver for this session. I'm going to ask a few questions and have an interesting conversation with all of you. So before starting, I would like to let the folks here sort of introduce themselves. Some of them you probably know, but I'd like them to talk about who they are, what they're doing, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, hi, everybody, and thank you so much, not only for the invite, but also for some of the comments. I was excited to hear about Ruben's paper and also Lisette's experience, and it's really exciting to be in community with people who really care about these issues. My name is Francelo Chillo. I am I'm a director of the Office of Public Engagement at NTIA, and so I've been working on broadband issues for a minute, and I think when we're talking about workforce development and empowerment, I want to make sure that we are anchoring this conversation in two things. One being, what can we enable people to do with the information that they get when they leave this room? And secondly, to a point that someone made to me when I was at a conference in Detroit many years ago, how do we scale love? The reason why I bring up how do we scale love is because we do all of these things because we love our communities, because we love our families, because we love our neighbors, because we want people to have opportunities. And I think when we anchor our work in like the people that we love, the reasons why we do it, we're going to get better outcomes than if we just treat this as about data or about these populations that are overlooked, because the people that we're trying to support are in this room. A lot of us know people who are low income, who are living with disabilities, who are in areas that are hard to reach. Like, a lot of people that we know in our networks are struggling with these issues, even though we're in this fancy hotel room and with fancy chandeliers and all these wonderful things. As much as we can acknowledge our privilege, we also know a lot of people who are still on the wrong side of the digital divide and who don't have the same opportunities that we do. So when we have this conversation today, I encourage all of you to be thinking about what's one thing we can do when we leave here to change an outcome. Like, what's one thing we can do just to fight a little bit harder to make sure that we're serving the people that we're standing up for every single day.
Awesome. My name is Gilbert Resendez. I work with Francella at NTIA, but in our Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth as a federal program officer. I've been with NTIA since July of 2019, so I just celebrated 5 years with the agency. Yeah, thank you. And this work has been very, very meaningful. I always enjoy coming to things like this to chat with our community. I grew up in a rural part of Northern California where a lot of people did not have access to the internet. I was lucky enough to grow up close to a California State University campus where the internet was very accessible for myself and my family, though not always affordable to people in the community. So it is very exciting to work on issues like this around accessibility, affordability, and making sure that we can get everyone the skills necessary to participate in our modern digital economy.
Hello, everyone. Ronnie Hammond. I'm the director for the Maryland Office of Statewide Broadband, which is right next door. I've been with the state of Maryland since 2016, but in the capacity of the Broadband Office since 2021, when they were reestablished as the statewide Office of Broadband from the Governor's Office of Rural Broadband. Now, with those names and titles, you can kind of see what the disconnect was, right? Rural Broadband and then the statewide Office of Broadband, where they wanted a more approachable entrance into digital inclusion and digital equity across the state, right? Not just focused on that infrastructure piece in our rural communities, but also the access and accessibility and affordability and adoption to the internet. It wasn't until February, actually, of this year that I took the role as director for the office with a focus on being more community focused in our initiatives and our programs and projects. The state of Maryland, since 2020, really has awarded over close to $400 million in infrastructure and digital equity initiatives. And now with $267 million of BEAD funding and $13.4 million in digital equity funding, now we can kind of reach those, the remaining unserved and underserved communities within our state. We're at 98% connected right now outside of BEAD and our DEE funding. And one thing, and I'll probably mention this a couple times, is being able to reach that remaining underserved populations. Now our focus can really be on adoption, affordability, and access. No longer, long gone are the days where we can't think about, having those families adopt the internet. And now, only 5% of what we've seen with infrastructure funding traversing and digital equity funding, it's a time to revamp that, not only with state dollars and federal dollars, but with private dollars and being able to, accumulate partnerships to acquire those, those private state and federal dollars to contribute to digital equity. And so I'm excited to be here and create partnerships and conversations with our federal partners, looking over our shoulders with the BEAD and DE funding, but excited to have them here for this conversation.
Great. One of the things I really honestly love about the BEAD program is that it feels like it's the first time people who have been marginalized and also people of color have actually had the chance to truly give feedback on the whole program throughout the whole process. And my team and I actually, we were encouraged when Commerce and NTIA reached out to us to say, we really need you guys to get involved and get people involved. So it's really important for this to succeed, not only because of its importance, but also because we don't want people to say, well, we asked them and they didn't do anything. So it's really important. So we appreciate that before we continue. I wanted to know how the program as a whole, throughout the nation is working. How many states have been approved for the proposals for the plans, and sort of like an update on how far we gotten there.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to take that one. So as everyone knows, there are 56 different unique jurisdictions that are eligible to apply for BEAD funding. That's the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and then the 5 territories. The blessing of that is that there are 56 different ways which people can implement BEAD and 56 different initial proposals. The difficult part for that is that there are 56 different ways that we are evaluating and reviewing those. So we're happy to say that all jurisdictions have submitted to NTIA an initial proposal. And we are working very hard to get those out. I believe today we just announced another one, but we are getting those out to states as quickly as we can with their approved initial proposals, so that they can then begin the work of administering their challenge process, taking in proposals for how they want to sub-grant funds or implement funds, and really just start connecting every person in America to high-speed internet.
Great. And just following up on that, and then I'll ask you a question that you just made me think about. Now, how was the feedback during the comment process? How was the feedback used, or how useful was it, rather, for you folks over at NTIA to improve the proposals at the state level?
Yeah, so every state was required to post their initial proposals for public comment, and then also address to NTIA how they implemented those comments into their initial proposals. I think the beauty of that is it really gave marginalized communities, historically marginalized communities, the opportunity to be a part of participatory democracy and really share what was really important in their communities around what was hindering them from accessing the internet, accessing it from an affordability standpoint, what skills were necessary, and allowed them to implement that into their plans. I guess I'll let Ronnie ask if he wants to add anything about how states did that.
Definitely. Again, I'm going to talk about BEAD plans and DE plans, but the requirement was 30 days, public comment period. We did 45 because we just, we knew that there was going to be an outreach gap that they won't find out for about 2 weeks to begin with, right? So additional 15 days, so 45 days max for public comments. And the reason for that is we can no longer, it's crazy to build a program that impacts the community without the influence of the community, right? We have to hear from the ground what the concerns and issues are. And so without being able to have those comments and actually implement that into our plans, the program and the plan serves no purpose. So it's instrumental, both in our BEAD and our digital equity plan. We didn't just want to hear from our stakeholders, our partners in the local jurisdictions. We didn't just want to hear from the ISPs. We wanted to hear from those families, from those homes, what they needed and what they wanted from us and what they did not see in our plans. And we held webinars, we held summits, and we held town halls to have those conversations and influence those discussions.
Yeah, I should also add a number of states also, every state was required to conduct what's called local coordination, meaning that they had to go to local communities under the digital equity program. We asked them to go to what we call covered populations. So those are historically marginalized communities, communities of color, returned citizens, justice-involved individuals. So that's also work that they did to involve the community in excess of the 30 days, or I guess in Maryland's case, 45 days of the public comment period, where states were actively going to the communities to solicit feedback and understand truly what was going on in the communities, so they could not only include that in their digital equity plans, but their BEAD proposals as well.
So I just want to chime in here to respond to Edwin's question, but I want to level set because I don't know that everybody in the room knows the acronyms. And I'll say that at NTIA, I very often am sitting in rooms and just want people to just make sure they explain it to me. So the BEAD program is the program that was essentially deployed across the country to all 50 states, 6 territories, where it focuses on broadband access. So that is about the actual wire lines, about making sure that people have digital infrastructure to have connections nearby. The digital equity programming is focusing on part 1 and part 2 about each state and territory having funding for making a plan, and then for the capacity grant for them to actually implement a plan and essentially like bring it to life with public comments. And then the third part of that being the competitive grant process, which is for nonprofits and other eligible entities to be able to apply directly to NTIA for funding. In terms of your question about what was the public comment like, every state and territory had their own challenge process where people could, or comment process where people could either put in input or challenges, or essentially say, these are populations that we think that you should serve. But something that's important that when I want to lift up, those deadlines, yes, they were relevant to BEAD, but we need people to continually comment and hold their states and territories accountable. So it is not enough for us to just get in on comment periods on a specific grant. This is an ongoing process where the standards of connectivity and what we are expecting out of these plans will continue to increase. Our ideas of what it is to be adequately connected today will look different in 5 years. It'll look different in 10 years. Your iPhone will look different. What you're expected to know in terms of benchmark skills is going to look different 5 and 10 years from now. So when we're thinking about those deadlines being over and done, I just want to invite people into an ongoing conversation about what exactly is it that you need from not only your government and planning, but what is it that you need to do as a community to hold those people accountable.
I just want to pick back off that. And you're absolutely right, Francilla. We were allowed to use about 1% of our DE capacity grant to update our DE plan. And we've committed to our constituency every 6 months that we're going to update our plan with the feedback and comments that we have ongoing. As you mentioned, it's not just that 30, 45 days that we want public comments. It's continuous. And we dedicated an email line for our constituency to email with comments and feedback on our plan so that we can continuously update. We're continuously building out programs and projects, right? And so we need to update that, but look at areas of opportunities that we're missing, and we'll only know that from our communities.
And that's really important because, most people made comments on the plans, but you cannot improve what you cannot measure. And so as we all roll these things out, the improvements are needed. Sure.
Yeah, so you made me remember that not other states also made that commitment and have vehicles by which to do that. And it's very important that you also communicate with your states. To Francella's point, it's also important that you communicate what you're seeing in your communities to NTIA. I'm a federal program officer supporting the District of Columbia with BEAD and digital equity implementation. And there is a Gilbert in every single state who's supporting the state offices, who's supporting the state broadband and digital equity offices, and then also working at NTIA, who kind of serves as that bridge between the program and the people on the ground in the states. So it's also important that you make sure that you connect with your federal program officer in the community that you work in or the communities that you serve, and just make sure that NTI is also involved in what you're hearing and sharing with the states, and also just make sure that you know that we're here to be a partner to you as well.
And now we move into the fun stuff, the challenges. So speaking of challenges, and it's great to know that people can give feedback still. So I'll try to explain it for everybody what we mean by the challenge process, and please feel free to amend anything or correct anything, okay? So in essence, the challenge process is more or less like this. Once the state begins to implement their plan, there is a process where if you live in a multi-unit building, for example, you need, like the idea is, it sounds simple enough, right? 3 people in that building can say, hey, I don't have the right connectivity. I need to talk to somebody at the local level, like a LULAC or an HTTP sort of representative, and they will contact somebody like you at the state level, which, by the way, most of the state administrators are awesome. Talk to them, and then they will follow up and take care of the connectivity if there is a need. Now, at the highest level, it sounds so simple. And when I read it, and I read all the 2,000 pages, I read every single proposal for every state and territory with my team. So we were really excited about that. But then when we sat back and started looking at it, and try to say, okay, well, what does this look like in real life? Then we said, okay, actually, it's not that simple, because those 3 people living in that building don't know we exist. Like, they don't know we exist at the local level. They don't know that this is happening. Even though there are tools to test this, the speed, they don't know how to test the speed. In fact, I was telling, I had this one intern that came from Apple, and he knew a lot more about connectivity than me. And I said, I'm a pretty smart guy, right? I don't understand this. It doesn't make any sense to me. So then there was no marketing money to educate folks about this. And one of the things that was great about ACP was the sort of like the marketing aspect of ACP. I think one of the reasons why it's so effective is because people like HTTP and Hispanic Federation and the likes, they were so good at educating people, but it feels like there was no funding for that here. And it was almost like the intention and the spirit of access is there, but then the bureaucracy, the existing bureaucracy doesn't take care of the need. What are people doing at the state level to creatively address this, specifically to the challenge process, and what is NTIA doing to sort of mitigate this problem? I know it's a big question, sorry.
Sure, I'll go first. The challenge period, this is our opportunity really to refine our unserved and underserved areas, right? And so it's a 90 to 100 day process, right? The first 30 days are where the challenges come in. The next 30 days are rebuttals. The next 30 days are where the final determinations are made. And then there's a period where NTIA reviews those final determinations. What this allows us to do is really hear from our communities, not just the ISPs and jurisdictions, but those homes, right? So we know that in the case of CIIs and MDUs, multi-dwelling units, there's areas of opportunities. So we've been holding webinars. We've hosted a webinar. We've been meeting with, we're lucky to be housed within the Department of Housing. We have very good partners there. And so we're meeting with our nonprofits, community anchor institutions on, it's like almost like a train the trainer approach. This is our challenge process. This is what it entails. And so, go within your communities, go within your multi-dwelling units and your community colleges, your libraries, to let the people know that this is an opportunity for them. If they're really experiencing, inadequate access to the internet, they may not be able to do speed tests, right then and there. They may not even know what a speed test is, right? But let them know that this is an opportunity.
I didn't know.
It's difficult. What is a speed test? How do right? Let them know. Train them on how to access. And we send out links. Well, you just use this speed test link, and just you could do it for them. And this is kind of what we would use digital navigation, right, to go out to some of these facilities and do the speed tests for them, so that they can group these challenges on these locations and enter them into our systems. But it's almost a train the trainer approach, and that's working directly with our stakeholders and our partners and constituents in the state.
Are there other states doing something like this? It's actually sounds
Yeah, so I'm happy to take it from there. So just a step back and then a few steps forward. The BEAD program, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, like Francella said, is principally focused on the deployment piece and the accessibility piece around challenges around accessing the internet. Like Ronnie said, the principal mission that we've asked states to do is to make sure that their unconnected households and underconnected households, or unserved and underserved households and businesses, are connected to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. NTIA, the law that we were given by Congress, says that states have to use the national broadband map that the FCC manages to make those determinations off of. So the challenge process says, hey, we, the state of Maryland, I guess for this example, with the map that the FCC has given us, these are the locations that we have. Now you, community members of Maryland, tell us what you see on the field. Challenge the map, challenge the assumptions that we've made based off of this map before we start putting money out into the ground and have the rubber hit the road. So that's a mandate that every state is required to do. Again, there are 56 jurisdictions that are eligible, so it looks a little bit different in those 56 different jurisdictions, but by and large, every state is charged with conducting a challenge process of some sort, making sure that they're engaging the right community members to participate in that challenge process. And to Ronnie's point, we do know, it's very difficult. Those households that really need it, that may not be showing up on the map, those are oftentimes your hardest to find households, oftentimes because they are the households that don't have access to internet.
If I could just add here two things. So just in light of the topic, just about reality to expectations, I just want to have some real talk about how these funding programs are structured and our expectations of like what we're used to when we talk about tech policy. So when we talk about tech, you think about your laptop, your phone, your iPad. You have expectations that a company is going to come up with this really amazing product. They're going to have advertising, they're going to have print ads, they're going to be on the radio, they're going to be on TV. There's all these places where they're going to give you information. They're going to show you this really sexy topic. They're going to show you how to use it. And you have there's a constant information flow about these things that are constantly like this tech that's getting better and better and better. This is the first time that government has attempted a program like this. Like there's no template for this. As much as the BTOP program is used as a point of reference, there is no comparison for the amount of money that is being pushed out the door in grant money and investments to compare to this moment. In those tranches of money, there is no money for just advertising. We couldn't just go and order the sign. We can't go and reach out to do a radio ad. We can't just go and buy the things that you would normally expect of a company to do that works on tech. So I just want to make sure we're level setting just our expectations that even though we're talking about tech, we are also dealing with the bureaucracy of government, where this program, as much as the money that's going out the door, has to be invested with very rigorous guidelines. Like there is high specificity on how this money can be used. Like we can make copies, but I can't order pens for an event. We can, there's very specific things that you can do with it. And then adding to that, which makes this really hard, is we should also set our expectations that as much as this money is going to literally transform the digital landscape across the nation, there are some places that government was never designed to go. There are some communities where government is never going to be able to reach, even with our best efforts. I will use census as an example. And so think about that when you are thinking about your expectations about what these investments are going to do. Because these investments are the start of a conversation that is going to have to be continued in counties, in states, in regional partnerships, in schools, in all sorts of venues long after the grant money expires. So as much as I'd love to think that, yes, it's going to be transformative, it is the beginning of a really long conversation if our goal is to make sure that every single person everywhere has digital opportunities.
All right, great comment. And we like real talk, so that's so good. That's good. Now, related to that in real talk, everybody's talking about ACP and how much it's hurting everybody. One of the things that was interesting about the BEAD program is that every state had to adopt ACP in order to get the funding. So, and I've spoken to a number of state administrators, from East Coast all the way up to Pacific Northwest and different topographies. They really relied on the chunk of money from ACP. Like I give an example, Idaho, for example. When I spoke to the state administrator, they spent a lot of money on just the laying out the cable because it's so vast. It's like Nevada, right? It's just like all this land. They couldn't, and they were nowhere near as advanced in infrastructure as you are in Maryland or Virginia, for example. But they were really counting on other monies at the state level and ACP to reach the accessibility piece. But now, what that means is now we have, like, every one of you has that deficit. How are the states dealing with that deficit? And I'm curious about you too. Like, how are you dealing with that deficit, and how is everybody else in the rest of the country dealing with that deficit?
One word: painfully. ACP was such an instrumental piece in access to the internet. The state of Maryland used ARPA funds when EBB actually transitioned to ACP. It went from $50 to $30. We said, "Oh no, this is gonna harm a lot of our families." So we did an additional $15 subsidy, and we called it the Maryland Emergency Broadband Benefit, and we had that at the start of 2021 up until ACP ended, and it just added $15 on top of the ACP to create $45. It's not quite that $50 that we saw with EBB, but it was a little bit more, right? And we dedicated $45 million to that. Built into both in the original guidance for DE and for BEAD was ACP, right? And when we found out the lapse of ACP, well, it began, well, what do we do now? How do we build out affordability options, right? BEAD literally is broadband equity access and deployment, right? Equity is in there, right?
It's 250,000 people in your state, I think, right?
What's that?
It's like 250,000 people
that were using, that signed up for ACP. There were closer to 700,000 that were eligible. We were reaching about another 180 with the MEBB subsidy, but now, how do we build that affordability into our plans? What does that look like? We don't have enough state dollars to dedicate to the subsidy anymore. So what does that look like? Does that mean now we introduce policy and legislation? Maybe that means, giving tax incentives at the end of the year to our ISPs who provide subsidies implemented in their service plans for those low-income households. What does that look like, right? And so we're thinking of options outside of just building it into our BEAD and DE plans. But it's getting our elected officials on board, and we were just having this conversation on some of the legislation and policy that we're introducing. But in our BEAD plan itself, we've implemented that the internet service providers must have an affordability plan in order to participate and receive funding through the BEAD funding that we have. They have to have an affordability plan. Not only that, they have to have a commitment to outreach and engagement to provide information and resources to low-income households who may need additional support with digital skills or digital training, right? And so we're trying to build that equity piece into the B plan. Now, we didn't mention, we talked about, the funding restraints, but the funding allocation for BEAD is with the funding that we have to reach our unserved homes first. If we have any funding left, then we can reach our underserved homes. If we have any funding from there, we can reach our community anchor institutions with gigabit speeds. And if we have any funding left over from there, then we can go to non-deployment initiatives, which is workforce development and digital equity initiatives. The state of Maryland is barely going to be able to get through maybe 75% of our underserved. We're not going to have enough funding to reach our CAIs and go into non-deployment initiatives with that BEAD funding. And so, we're trying to think of outside sources, outside resources, which I mentioned earlier, just partnering and creating, stakeholders and partnerships with nonprofits, philanthropic organizations to really influence more money than the 13.5 that we had with the DE funding. But around ACP, that's what we're doing. We're trying to create legislation and get on policy within the state to get our elected officials on board and building that also into our B plans.
I have to rush a bit. So in 1 minute or less, what is the rest of the 50 states doing?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can do that in a minute. But this is something that has impacted every state. Every state under the BEAD rules was charged with the task of putting together an affordable plan, an affordability plan that providers would have to follow should they accept BEAD funding. So this is something that every state is having to reassess and reevaluate.
I have two more questions in like 3 minutes, but I want to take advantage of this great panel to ask this. The money so far for the BID program has gone to the states as it should, and I think it's great. What about I know there is one additional funding opportunity, 1.25 billion. Who can apply for that? What is the intention of that? What's the deal with that?
Yesterday, NTIA announced the release of the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Notice of Funding Opportunity. And so that is going to be an opportunity for people who are running organizations. There are going to be people who are collaborating with government entities. There are lots of entities that will fit under the eligible entities category. And so I encourage everybody in this room to make sure that you open the NOFO. If nothing else, go and look up the definition of eligible entity so that you find out if your organization is one of the people that should be thinking about applying. And if doing a government grant application is too onerous, like it's just not possible. I know that I've worked at nonprofits that don't have development officers, or maybe you don't have experience with federal government grants. Find a partner, find a way to collaborate, because this is gonna be something that a program that there has never been a time in our nation's history that the federal government is investing $1 billion into digital equity program. There's no template for this. And so the thing is, even this $1 billion, it's not going to be enough, but it's a whole lot of money to start. And I also want to acknowledge the fact that, like, literally for decades, people who've been doing broadband work long before I started were begging for people to care and invest in this. So we're here now. And I encourage everybody who is either touching an organization, working in an organization as an advocate, find out if you're eligible to apply. If you're working for populations that are for the covered populations, that includes older adults, people living with disabilities, people in rural areas, people who are justice impacted individuals. All of the populations are identified in that notice of funding opportunity, and the deadline is September 23rd. Say it with me. What is the deadline?
September 23rd.
What's the deadline?
September 23rd.
Because we can't complain if we don't show up and apply. And one thing is for me that I worry about, we are going to get to 2025 when they announce all of the grant recipients, and we're going to say, oh, I don't see my organization on this list, or, oh, those organizations don't necessarily touch my community. Here is our opportunity to make sure that this reaches far and wide. So even if you're not going to apply, I encourage you to share the information. When you go to internetforall.gov, you can pull up all of the information about your state. It will have a drop-down menu so that you can find out what's your state's BEAD plan, what's your state's digital equity plan, so that you can at least get information there. And then if you go to ntia.gov and get any, it doesn't matter where you go, just type in digital equity competitive grant. It will take you to the landing page that has all of the resources about how do you get grant ready? What are the things that you should be thinking about? What are important things that you need to include in your application for it to be competitive? Because they are looking for a collective impact. So I encourage you again, think about what's your plan for September 23rd. And if you're not going to apply, think about sharing it with an organization who might.
And definitely lean on your state broadband offices for technical assistance. Much like our office, we provide technical assistance to all of our community institutions and nonprofits when they are applying for federal dollars.
Internetforall.gov, when you do your drop down, it will have all of the state officer, federal program officer, all of that information is on that page for your state.
So like my wrestling coach said, go get your money, right?
Go get your money.
And the last question, NTIA, Commerce, EPA, everybody's going out of their way to roll out these funds, before the election. Do we have to be worried? I mean,
just to be clear, the funding that we are rolling out has nothing to do with election timelines. And I also, maybe just as a I'll say this is not related to NTIA. For those of us who work on broadband and show up in communities all the time, the people who are not connected don't think this has anything to do with politics. So I just want to be very clear, because when you're not connected, when you can't get online, you don't care who's in office. All you care about is how do you get online. So I just want to be very clear about that. So I didn't mean to allude to anything about 2025. I just wanted to be very clear. Those deadlines have nothing to do with the election.
Well, we could talk all day, but thank you for your time and for your kindness, all of you. Thanks so much. And thank everybody for your patience.